Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Deputy Director of the Renewables Division. I'm in charge of the RPS, and I manage the SMART program, which is why we're all here. So the purpose of today's meeting is to be reviewing and generating discussions and a Q&A on the new line on consumer protection that we have put forward as part of the SMART emergency rulemaking. The webinar that we have scheduled for tomorrow is on the new community solar. So we're doing consumer protection today, community solar programs tomorrow. Just a quick agenda for we're going to start with an overview of the guideline, including the purpose of the policy, changes that we've made as part of the emergency rule. So they're going to be reflected and impacted in our new consumer protection process. I'm going to open it up to questions. We are working with this virtual platform, so I appreciate everybody's patience with me. This may, it's not quite as easy as just, people raise their hands in a big room. But the way that we're going to do that, and I'll revisit it when we get to that point in the presentation, is just have you raise your hand through the webinar sidebar, and we'll just take it from there. We are going to be recording this presentation, and we will post it to the SMART Emergency Rulemaking webpage. And again, today we are going to be collecting comments and answering questions, but formal written comments are due on June 18th to do at mass.gov guideline. What is the purpose of the guideline? As you know, when we first created the SMART program, we placed a greater emphasis on consumer protection standards, primarily through the creation of our customer disclosure forms. With this guideline, we are hoping to strengthen them even further. And this is really just part of a growing movement and focus on consumer protection issues that has been undertaken by DOER, by the Attorney General's office, by the solar industry itself. Thank you all for your dedication in looking at these issues and making sure that are educated of what the product is that they are purchasing. And really, this is meant to just help increase consumer awareness and consumer education when they're entering into solar contracts. So what are the application requirements that directly relate to consumer protection? The primary is the customer disclosure form. Require customer disclosure forms for all small project applications that are less than or equal to 25 kWAC. So we have different forms for direct ownership and third party. So if you have a customer that is outright buying a solar project to have it installed on the house, that they would have to have a direct owned form filled out. If it's a third party owned system, then they would have a third party owned form filled out. And then we have one form for community solar, but that applies to all customers of community shared solar and low income community shared solar. And the only exceptions to the customer disclosure form requirement are so-called anchor off-takers in a community shared solar project. So those are the one or two off-takers that take an amount exceeding an amount equivalent to 25 kWAC, or customers that are without a contract. And I do want to bring your attention to the new forms website and the Clear Result website for customer disclosure forms. So I'll show you guys real quick. We haven't made major changes to these forms. The biggest difference, as you can see, basically we address the fact that low-income customers are intended to receive a savings. And then just based on going through these applications, we've added this new line here called name on electric bill under customization. So, this is really just to recognize that it may not be the customer of record that's filling out this form and signing this form, and that's okay. But when we're reviewing things, it just makes it easier if we do have the name on the customer that's listed on the customer bill. So if you have spouses and one spouse is the name on the utility bill and the other spouse is the name on the contract, just so we have a clear connection to make when clear result and do we are reviewing these forms. So that's basically the main difference. So if you can go and download these forms, we're not enforcing a time by which you have to use the updated form. We would ask that you try to transition to moving to these. It's just the additional information on there is to help ease the review of these projects. The next application requirement specifically applies to low-income customers. Low-income customers are customers that are on a low-income utility rate class, so the R2 rate class for most service territories. And we do require that low-income customers, eligible low-income customers, be provided a demonstrated savings. So we've gotten a lot of questions, and we have more information about this in the low-income guide. Of what we're looking for in the review from the consumer protection standpoint is we just want to make sure that we can see a saving. So obviously ways that you can show this is fixed discount, are providing credits at no cost. That's obviously demonstrated savings. We're not saying that you have to use one of these methods, but really it's just demonstrating to the department that you are providing savings to that customer, and it is a net savings. And again, more information can be found in the low-income guideline. So one of the new processes that we are implementing as a result of the emergency regulations, and that is outlined in this particular guideline, is an audit. So DOER shall now be conducting periodic audits. When we are auditing applicants, we will notify applicants ahead of the upcoming audit. So we're not just going to say your audit starts now, we will notify you in advance. And what we're going to be auditing are the customer contract details against the details provided in the forms. So as part of the audit process, any information that we request in the audit must be provided within 10 business days. So for small project applications, we collect contracts along with the customer disclosure forms, but we aren't collecting all the individual contracts for community shared solar projects. So if we're auditing a community shared solar project, we will be requesting the contracts that are associated with the forms that we have, and you have to provide it to us within 10 business days. What are we doing in this audit process? We are looking for material defects. So what do we mean by material defects? Material defects mean that there is missing information in the customer disclosure form or in the contract unless otherwise noted or explained. Major discrepancies between the contract and the customer disclosure form. We're going to be primarily looking at all the details on the form that relate to cost. So that's major discrepancies. If there are undisclosed fees that are within the terms of the contract and not disclosed on the form, we do have a line where you do have to affirmatively tell the customer if there are certain fees associated with the financing of this project. If there are misrepresented savings, and again, savings aren't a requirement unless the customer is low income. If the customer is not a qualified low income customer, you do not have to provide savings to them. However, if the customer is signing a contract where they believe that they will be provided a certain amount of savings, and then when you look at the details provided in the contract itself, then you can see that that may not be the case. So really, if the signed customer disclosure form represents some amount of savings to the customer where that may not happen, that will be a material defect. So again, the reason we're doing this is because consumers are informed. This particular issue is something that DOER is hearing about. DOER, I know the Attorney General's office is hearing about it too. I was just on an email with members from the Attorney General's office last week from a customer who was upset that he out that he was paying more to the solar company than he would have otherwise been paying to the utility, and he felt that he had signed up and lied to. So we're really trying to stop these sorts of things from happening. So again, it's with the misrepresented savings, it's not that you have to provide savings to customers, but if they end up paying more to a solar company, which may happen, they are aware of that. And again, those are specifically for non-low income eligible customers. For eligible low income customers, you must demonstrate savings to them. So again, those are customers on the low income rate class or customers that live in an area that is designated as environmental justice based on eligibility criteria. And then we are also going to be looking at other applicable customer disclosure requirements. So we have further customer disclosure requirements that we're talking about tomorrow in these alternative community shared solar and low-income community shared solar programs. So we want to make sure primarily that consumers and customers are fully informed and aware of all of the pertinent details when they're signing up for these programs. Warnings. If we find a material defect in the process of an audit, DOER will issue one warning. And so that's one warning per material defect. It is possible for more than one warning to be issued on a single application. It's also possible for more than one warning to be issued within a single audit. And then upon the issuance of 3 warnings, even if issued concurrently, the applicant shall not be allowed to submit any new SMART applications for 12 months. So really, those material defects that are outlined in the previous slide and outlined in the guideline itself, those are the things that we're looking for. And if we find a material defect, we will issue a single warning. So if once the applicant has been issued 3 warnings, even if they are issued currently, the applicant will be barred from submitting new applications for 12 months. We do have a remediation process, however. Upon the issuance of a warning, the applicant may request a meeting with DOER and may request remediation. The DOER shall consider all remedial requests and we may make modifications upon any determinations at the department's discretion. So, I think we recognize that this is a very strict process. We intentionally made it strict because we want to make sure that these issues are being attended to. These issues are receiving fair review and attention by developers, by consumers. I think, but we recognize that sometimes there are explanations for warnings that we may issue. So just to clarify, remediation, once we issue a warning, the warning will be official. And it's just after the fact that we may accept a request for remediation, and discussions will proceed at that point. So that is really just the main overview of the guideline. The guideline is on our website here. It's basically what I just went through was just an overview without getting into all the nitty-gritty details that we have within the guideline itself. So at this point, opening it up to you. So again, the purpose of today's meeting, I want to answer questions. We want to have some back and forth to the extent possible. So if you look at your webinar sidebar, you should see a hand that you can raise. And if you raise your hand right now, you can ask any questions you may have, provide any comment or feedback you may have. Let me know. So I open the floor to everybody else. Courtney, starting with you. And please announce yourself and your association.
Hi, this is Courtney Philly-Cart from Cleveland's Law Group. Thank you guys for doing this webinar to walk through the guideline. I just had a couple of, I think, just sort of technical questions. It's my understanding that the audits that are discussed in the guideline are conducted pre-submission of claim form. So, once a project has submitted an SQA, but before it's gone online. First, is that correct? And the second part is there a similar specific review audit process for projects post-COD or post-claim form?
No, so the audit is not necessarily prior to claim. The audit is just on submitted applications. So,
okay. So
it's very possible that we could be looking at projects that are already operating. And it's more the purpose of the warning, it's not necessarily to take action against a particular project, but rather unless we find that project is ineligible due to the requirement for low income savings. And if the project is ineligible based on that, then we may have to take action on the SQ itself. But if we just find material defects, then, we may have to look at the status of the SQ, but it's also mainly to issue a warning to the applicant themselves.
And that was my next, my next comment would be, and I think you sort of fully answered, but just if I can restate it, is that aside from a material defect and regardless of parking through the remediation process, so the only action that would be taken against the actual SQ is if there was somehow an eligibility criteria that wasn't being met, like as you said, the low income savings, for instance. Yeah.
Right, that's correct. So if the material defect was found to impact the actual eligibility of the project, that we may have to look at the overall issuance of the SQ, but otherwise it would just serve the purpose of providing a warning to the applicant.
And then finally, in terms of the warnings will there be a list of applicants or entities who've received warnings or who are precluded from submitting applications, or will somehow that be a public list, or will that be something that DOER maintains privately?
I don't think DOER has, yeah, I mean, obviously it would be subject to public records. So DOER hasn't made a determination whether or not this would be posted publicly, but that is certainly something we could consider.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, Elizabeth Mahoney, I'm going to go to you next.
Hello, thank you for taking me.
Of course.
Courtney just asked one of my questions, and I would encourage the department to consider publishing those companies, those applicants who have received warnings, so that consumers who are doing their due diligence and researching one of the many, many options they have in this field, for them to have all the information. It would be great if the department made that information available. And on that note, just looking at your updated forms that you pointed to us today, you've got the customer name and then the name on electric bill if different. I understand where you're going for your records, but given the definition of customer of record in the regulations, is that sending mixed signals to the industry as to who can sign contracts and who should be receiving these documents? And maybe not a question to answer today, but
yeah, we may have to take that back. I think we'll take that back. We were trying to clarify something that we have been getting a lot of questions on, but I can appreciate that perspective as well.
Okay. And then looking at the updated guidelines, specifically the section on information for low income generation units.
Yeah.
I think that is on maybe page 2 of your document. In that document, you say that an escalator can't exceed 3% per year. Where did DOER come up with that number? Just my knowledge of contracts limits me to having only seen really either a 2% or a 2.5% escalator, maybe a 2.9. 3% seems high by comparison.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we were thinking general escalators that we had seen, but certainly appreciate the AGO's feedback on that. And that guideline is also currently open for comment, so we'll take that under consideration.
Okay. And then, of course, we'll be submitting written comments. I'm just trying to get a little background before I dump more on you.
Yep, no problem.
And then also in that section, we may have a couple of suggestions for you. We understand that this is an industry that is national. We have a lot of great Massachusetts companies, obviously, but particularly those larger companies who are coming in from out of state and maybe don't have the wherewithal to understand how our low-income discount programs work. There might be some additional information that could be included in the guideline about that, so that it's kind of one-stop shopping for information for customers to understand how the credits apply to a customer's bill, and then how the low-income discount applies, so that the industry really understands that kind of rate-making perspective. So when they're making decisions about whether or not to accept the low-income adder, they have that background. So we may offer, understanding your desire, I'm sure, for simplicity here, are you open to adding a little bit more color onto this description?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can certainly appreciate that perspective, and I think it's in everybody's best interest if we try to provide as much information and make it as as accessible as possible. So absolutely appreciate that suggestion.
Okay, and sorry, two more things and then I'll shut up. Number one, in your exception to customer disclosure forms, you
Yeah.
I will walk carefully here because I know that this is also something that's open in your regulatory comments, and our office did comment on this particular point, but since it's in the guideline too, just maybe I'll take a slightly different route. Also appreciating the language that's included in the guideline up for discussion tomorrow. You've got an exception here in D(i) for customers enrolled without a consumer contract. I think
Right.
a concern here is that even though they might not have a contractual obligation, the consumer is likely making decisions based on what's promised to them, and having some sort of clear description of what that promise is so they can plan for that and maybe not over plan for that is probably helpful. And again, knowing that there will be some of this discussed tomorrow, I think there might be gaps, and perhaps it's something to consider adding some language here. Again, I probably needs language in the regs too, but not the same disclosure form, but some sort of disclosure form.
Right. And I will say in terms of the list of material defects, the last item on that list is disclosure requirements as required by the CSS and LICSS guideline for alternative programs. And so while they are, I think the application is that while those customers are exempt from actually signing a customer disclosure form, those projects are not exempt from our review subject to the audit process to ensure that particular information is provided to those customers.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
I'll think about that, but I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
That's good food for thought. And then just my last nudgy point is in the auditing section, you say applicants will be informed by the department in advance of the commencement of the audit. That why in advance and why not at the commencement of the audit?
I think it was in advance could be a day in advance. So I think we were thinking that just a formal notification of the forthcoming audit makes sense, but also can appreciate that may not be the best step to take.
Okay.
An audit. Yep, an effective audit.
And with that, I will stop talking. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Daniel Pertwee, I'm going to you.
Hey, Caitlin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. I just have two quick questions specifically for the small under 25 kW sector. Can you talk a little bit more about the date that the new disclosure forms will be required for projects to begin executing? I see 3 dates in the past that it could potentially be either the April 15th date, the May 18th date, or the date that the new disclosure forms were released, or would it depend on a future date, say like the date that the EDCs have their updated smart tariffs accepted by the DPU?
So I think at this point in time, I think we want to, we'll think on that, because I think we recognize that the customers have probably, installers probably have, forms signed with the old forms right now.
Right.
So, we don't want to force people to go back to multiple customers with new forms. So we haven't set a specific date. We will continue to accept the old forms for now. But DOER will take that back to see if, it would be appropriate to set like a very formal forms must be used.
Understood. So it is possible though that say like the April 15th date, like nobody, like all projects that hadn't received an SOQ by April 15th may be required. That's in the realm of possibilities, at least then, for you guys to consider.
I don't think we would apply this retroactively, especially since we just released the new forms.
Understood.
Yeah.
And my second question was going back to the process for warnings. This might just be my ignorance on the investigation process, but if there was an application that was found to have something in it that would prompt a warning, would that then initiate a further investigation by the DOER to see if other contracts fall into a similar category? Meaning you guys find one issue with one application and then go through to see if every application has that same recurring issue, thereby getting 3 strikes at one time. Does that kind of make sense? Is that how you would imagine that process working out?
I mean, it's possible. Obviously, when we conduct the audit, we're looking at any amount of applicant. So it's entirely possible.
Okay. Thanks, Caitlin. I appreciate it. Those are my only 2 questions.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Dan. Okay, Joseph Paley, you're up next.
Now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I've got a rather basic question. We are a small producer in Lowell, and next to us is an apartment complex where a number of the people are on Section 8, and we're constantly asked, how can they buy solar from us? Does DOER have any assistance for, we're not an international company, we're just a local company, to participate in this program? Right now, we're using a consolidator who is charging us for it because the rules and regulations appear to be far too complex for us to handle. Is there a willingness on the part of the Commonwealth to put producers and off-takers together in a simple and concise manner?
So just to repeat the question, Joseph, you were basically asking whether the Commonwealth would undertake any some sort of way to connect installers and possible customers. So at this point in time, the Commonwealth does not have any plans for that. I think we can appreciate that there are certain needs for finding particular customers, but at this point in time, I think that would be an entirely different process to undertake, because we would have to be, we obviously can't recommend individual companies to customers. If they ask us, we have certain information posted publicly about installers when we put up a qualified units list, but I think we can't, at this point in time, we don't have any plans to do so.
I understand that, and I understand that DOER has a mission, and listening to this webinar and other webinars, frankly, a lot of the information seems very obtuse and very involved in minutia. But I'm asking for something perhaps the DOER could do in the form of a simplified application or a brochure where people that are in the low income category or people such as myself that are not as sophisticated could also research one person in DOER so we could say, how do we go about doing this? I understand there's a need or perceived need for a lot of this questions, and whether we need 2.9 or 3% is way beyond my level of knowledge. But the basic concept of producing solar energy in Massachusetts and making it available to people in low income seems to be, there doesn't seem to be anyone in the Commonwealth that says, I know how to do that and I will assist the generators and the off-takers. And you have no interest or plans to have a person or a function where people can do that. It seems very disappointing and counterproductive to what the Commonwealth wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you have questions on any part of the application process, you can always contact DOER through our main inbox. You can contact Clear Results, who administer the actual application portal. I think, you know, we're always available to answer questions. So, but beyond that, we just don't have the capacity to provide anymore. But we're always available to hop on a phone call, to answer an email. So if you have any questions, you know, just let us know.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the next person, Kyle Wallace.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to do this today. It's really helpful. I have a couple of questions. The first is around the demonstration of savings for the low-income customers. The guideline talks pretty specifically about PPAs or leases and how to demonstrate savings in those situations. And I just had a question of whether there was any guidance around how to handle that for customer-owned or finance systems for low-income customers. Obviously, it's very rare, but we have seen it a few times, and just was curious if there were any thoughts on what you would want that demonstration of savings to look like in those situations.
You know what, Kyle? Let me think about that, because it is different with direct own, because obviously they're spending money on the installation, which will not be saved, which is inherently spending money, not saving money. But I think it's probably going to be some sort of look at what they would have, you know, by using solar energy, what they're saving on their utility bill on an annual basis. You know, how quickly they will see, you know, a return on investment for that project. But that's a good question. I can see how we need to maybe focus on that particular aspect of the requirement. So good question. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, we were thinking about it in terms of, you know, comparing the, you know, year one loan payments to, you know, potentially save, you know, utility bill savings plus the smart value that they would be getting, an estimated smart value. And then, you know, something like that potentially. But yeah, we just appreciate some more guidance on how exactly to show that.
Yeah,
and then,
definitely.
And then on just kind of on these demonstrations of savings documents in general, is DOER open to having some proactive submission of, you know, a company? I mean, the last thing we want to do is create a document that we believe fits, you know, the guidelines, and then start using that, and then, you know, get a warning after the fact because it was deficient in some way. Is it possible to, proactively submit these before we start using them, just to make sure that they're what, approved essentially by DOER?
Yeah, you can send it to us and we'll take a look at it.
Okay, great. And then my last question was around kind of if a developer gets kind of suspended for the 12-month period. I was just curious if there's been any thought about what would happen for the customers that are already potentially signed up with that contractor, but the smart application hadn't been submitted or approved, especially for customer-owned systems where they were going to be receiving the smart incentive, but if the developer they are contracted with can't apply for that. I just wasn't sure if if there's been thought about how to make sure the customers don't end up getting punished in those situations.
Yeah, so I don't think we have any specific answer for that yet. But if that were to happen, that's certainly a topic for discussion that the applicant could bring to DOER in terms of remedial, in terms of a request for remediation.
Okay, great. I think those are all my questions right now. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kyle. All right, Jackson Doty, I'm moving to you next.
Hi, Kaylin, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to set this up today. My question is, for a project that is low-income community shared solar, working through an aggregator, can you confirm that those off-takers would be exempt from disclosure forms since the municipal aggregation customers do not have a contract?
Right. So if there's no contract, they wouldn't have to provide the community, the customer disclosure form. Sorry, there's some feedback here. So they wouldn't have to provide the disclosure form, but they, as I was explaining to Elizabeth earlier, we still have disclosure requirements for those customers. And so those other disclosures would be subject to this audit process.
So in other words, we still need to verify the savings, but we don't necessarily need to use the disclosure form that you were referencing earlier?
Yes, exactly. So the way we have it now is you still have to verify savings. You still have to provide certain disclosures to the customer. If you look at the other guideline, we want to make sure the customer is informed around what does it mean by participating in community shared solar? What does it mean? How does the settlement of RECs interplay and interact with that customer? So like things like that we want to make sure that the customer has received information about that. And then definitely the verification of savings for sure.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Ainsley Tucker, you are next.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I have just a couple questions, and I hope one doesn't take us too far afield, but I'm an intern at a solar insurance company, essentially, and I'm trying to find out whether if you have a third-party owner of a solar system, does that owner lose eligibility for the smart incentive if an off-taker moves off of the property or there's no longer substantial electric load? Basically, I have some general questions about losing eligibility essentially for the incentive payments, and that's basically the first question.
So Ainsley, just in the interest of trying to keep the conversation focused on this particular guideline, can you shoot me an email separately on that? We can definitely talk about that. It's just not directly related to this process. Quick
Yes.
answer though is it shouldn't impact the smart payments or the eligibility.
Okay.
We just have to process changes with DOER and with the
Okay, great. I can definitely email you. I might have a few follow-up questions, but maybe we could talk offline because it is a little bit not directly related to this particular topic. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. All right, Eleanor Gilbane, you're up next.
Hi, yes. This is Eleanor Gilbane. I'm with Sonova Energy. Sorry, there's an echo. Hang on. Let's see if I got rid of it. And I was actually asking, I had a similar question with respect to batteries. So with respect to the similar question to the person who had asked earlier about ownership and savings. So if you have a third-party owned system and include a battery, sometimes that makes it so that there's not savings on that product. Would you not be able to sell it to a low-income customer as a result?
If the customer is not directly receiving savings, that you could not provide that product to the customer. You know, I think it depends on it. Yeah, it depends on, you know, what's being presented to the customer. But even with a battery included, the requirement is that if they are an eligible low-income customer, they must receive savings by signing up for a solar installation.
Okay. And then my second question is relating to the new addition of the person on the electric bill on your disclosure form. Our disclosure, I think this is probably true for a lot of people in the solar industry. Our disclosure form is, of course, tied to our contract in the sense that it populates with information from the contract. And that is not typically something we ask our customers to put on our contract, you know, whoever's on their electricity bill, because it's not part of the contract itself. So that's something we would have to build out, which is fine. We'll work on that. But my question for you is I know you have said there's not a deadline by which we have to start using the new forms and all of that, but is that like a material defect with respect to your audit process? You know, not having that customer who's on the electricity bill on the disclosure form?
No, we wouldn't consider that a material defect.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Emily Kaspar, you're up next.
Hi, thanks, Caitlin. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We have a couple questions regarding the distinction of the legal entity for purposes of staying within not only the 25 kW rule under community solar, but for also contracting purposes as far as the relationship between the disclosure form and the customers. So the first question is, can you confirm that we would only need one disclosure form per like legal entity, even if they had multiple accounts? Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then for the purpose of determining a legal entity, I think in the past we have submitted, of course, the disclosure forms and allocation lists to Clear Result for approval. And they have come back and said, hey, it looks like you've got a lot of accounts that possibly violate the 25 kW rule. Can you confirm that they are all under a single tax ID? And we were able to sort of use that state tax ID to confirm that they were a single legal entity. Can you confirm that that's the way that DOER will define legal entity going forward? And is there any intent to codify that in writing?
So the legal entity classification, so that is, we actually, the new language that we have in the emergency reg on this issue was intended to codify that. Basically that we are making a distinction between customer record and legal entity when we're talking about participants in the community. So, you know, we are using the tax ID to identify distinct legal entities. So to answer your question, yes and yes. Basically, the purpose of putting the language into the reg regarding this specific eligibility requirement. It isn't a new requirement, as you know, most of you there who have been doing community solar. It was just, since we had been getting a lot of questions on this, it was just meant to really codify the rule that we had been applying already.
Right, and that we're totally thrilled about that, to be honest with you. And
yeah,
that's great. And I think the one step further that we would ask that you consider is just explicitly stating that the state tax ID is what is used to constitute sort of a legal entity. I don't think that's currently in the regs based on our read of it. And if that's not the case, I'm happy to go back and look. But last I checked, I don't think the state tax ID was what was written down.
yeah. So I guess my thinking on that is maybe that is something we could put into guidance and guideline on this issue. So if you're, that would be a good suggestion in your written comments you submit on this guideline.
Okay, yeah, happy to do that. So great. That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Emily. Okay, so I still see some hands raised from people who have asked questions before. So if you still want to ask a question, even if you've already asked a question, keep that hand raised. And then I'm going to go through. All right, going back to the top again. Courtney, if you have another question, now's your time.
Hey, Caitlin, this is Courtney. I had a sort of follow-up question to a prior question, actually two, but just on the back to the legal entity one.
Yeah.
The question would be is if you are a single legal entity and you are off-taking, say, 25 kW shares or otherwise from multiple projects, could you fill out one disclosure form that notices multiple projects? Does that would be fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, and you would just submit the same disclosure form with each SQA.
Each project. Yeah.
Yeah. But just to sort of, in terms of someone not having to sign, multiples. Because I think for a customer, they're thinking of it as the total and then having a, like if they need, say, 60 kW and that's spread out in 3 20 kW shares, right?
Yeah.
That they're just signing one form.
Actually, I take back my answer. Let me think about that some more, because I think the disclosure form has details about how much you're being allocated. Yeah, so I guess I think yes. Let me look back on this, because just to make sure that it's covered, because we want to make sure that how much you're being allocated from that particular project is covered. But if the one form is covering multiple projects, then the details should apply to the total that they're receiving.
Right.
Let's take a look at this.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, and get back to you on that.
The other one was, I think in response, this could be true for any project, particularly during these times where there's obviously paper interaction with individuals is obviously more challenging. Has DOER thought about a way, but obviously this is more relevant for customers without agreements, and kind of following up on the AG's question about having an alternative disclosure form, if you go that route, is there, again, in terms of streamlining the process, has DOER thought about some sort of online or, other sort of electronic way to submit, to execute these forms and then submit them, that would permit, sort of those folks not having to have the sort of the hard copy? where they could submit something, like if they're somehow, doing sort of a online application for community shared solar, and it's a click screen, or, a recorded consent, or, there's just sort of all other alternatives.
Yeah. I think at this point in time, no, I'm not saying I'm not saying we're opposed to that. I think we're open to it. It's just, things can be complicated when we're talking about technical improvements with state things.
Don't I know it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Kelsey Fiore, I'm going to you next.
Hi, thanks so much. Yeah, we had a couple questions about, I understand that a disclosure form won't be required for CCA customers. Is that the case
Yep.
for any kind of EDC-led opt-out CS program?
Right, that would also be the case. And so I think, we'll probably get more into this in the conversation tomorrow. Again, we would have some sort of disclosure requirements for customers in those types of programs. And, again, we'd have the requirements that low-income customers you have to demonstrate that they're receiving savings. It's really just, it wouldn't be that specific form. So I think we want some sort of disclosure provided to those customers. It's the form that they have to provide.
Great. So it'd be the disclosures that are laid out in the guideline that are required.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with regards to the 10-day turnaround required by developers, I guess we were kind of wondering how that timeline was determined and whether there would be an openness to a slight increase. It seems like a pretty quick turnaround.
So I think then if I would welcome a comment for a suggestion on a better round. I think if we're auditing and we need contracts, we obviously need to get those contracts as quickly as possible, which is the 10 business day, which is why we have the 10 business day requirement. Willing to consider alternative suggestions, but I think it's just we basically want to run these pretty expeditiously. So just, aware of perhaps maybe difficulties in pulling particular customer contracts, but also want to make sure that we get the information we need to actually conduct the audit.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kelsey. Okay, so again, going back to the top, Daniel Pertwee, if you have more questions, now's your time.
Sorry, Caitlin, I didn't have another question. Apologize.
Oh, that's fine, no problem. Kyle, do you have more questions? Kyle Wallace?
No, I did not.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Courtney, do you have more questions?
No, apologies.
No?
Let me unraise my hand. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Okay. Georgina Ariola, going to you.
Hi. Thank you. Just to make sure I understand the requirements. So in the past, we got guidance from, I believe, DOER and others that if a customer was signing up and we weren't entirely sure what project they were going to be on, the disclosure could have a language stating that, either the location of the project that they would be on or the total allocation could be listed as like to be not basically, essentially, you could say that information would be disclosed to the customer at a later time. And as long as we provided, I guess, a proof that we did pass on that information to the customer once they were assigned to a project, then that would suffice for, in terms of what needed to be presented for disclosure form to the customer. Is it my understanding that that is still acceptable under these guidelines?
We had said that in terms of the information that should be on the forms, the actual project information, you may not know which project would be providing, the customer would be assigned to yet. Terms, the financial terms that the customer was signing up under would remain constant.
Sure. Yep. And that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's fine. And then just to clarify, I think someone else asked this, but if an off-taker to a commercial business is signing up and they're going to have multiple shares, they can have a single disclosure form that for all those shares under a single contract.
Yeah. I'm going to take that back and take a look at that. So we can follow up separately.
Okay.
On that specific question. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That was all
right.
of my questions.
Yep. Thank you. Sean Moulton, going to you.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I have a question very similar in the same vein around, in some instances, we've found that a sales agent will be enrolling a customer, they'll size them, their allocation accordingly. And then in our QC, we find, maybe the customer system allocation needs to be adjusted. If we turn around and disclose said adjustment of allocation to our customers, is that satisfactory, or is that considered a material defect if there is a difference there?
So I think if you look at what we're talking about with material defects, obviously that would be a difference. Mm-hmm. But we do have, pull that up. Yeah, basically missing information or discrepancy, unless noted and explained adequately. So, I think we appreciate that can happen. So if you feel that scenario is not adequately represented in the way that we've written the guideline, certainly appreciate your comments on that. And I think that from our perspective, what we would want to find, I think if that does change, that's some information that can be provided in the audit. But also, if we want to make sure that the customer has received adequate disclosure and information. So we need to be able to verify that. So I guess my answer is I'm not saying that definitely wouldn't be considered a material defect. There may be further information that could be provided to demonstrate that it wasn't. But if there is a better way to capture that type of scenario in the guideline itself, then we would welcome your comment and recommendation on that in terms of this.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, any more questions? Doug, I saw you raising your hand a little bit. Do you have any questions, Doug Pope?
Yes, thank you. has DOER considered freezing the off-taker adders in Block 8, or like they did with the location-based adders? The problem with the community solar is you have increasing levels of expectation. We all do, for them to handle the customer correctly. And that's going to take supervision. That's going to take training, and yet you have a declining, continued declining block, and DOER won't know that when it's reached the point of being non-economic until after it's happened, and you'll be behind the 8 ball at that point.
So I think on that, I mean, that lies directly within the regulation itself. So, in comments that have been submitted related to that, we will consider. But other than that, I can't comment on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Courtney.
Hi, thanks, Caitlin. Just following up to the, not Doug, but the person before's question, I guess trying to sort of tease that out a little bit more in terms of disclosure forms that sort of have a TBD on size when a customer doesn't know which facility they're going to be paired with at the time of execution. I guess my follow-up is, so long as you have a paper trail between you and the customer that says, we've determined, that this would be the right size for you, and then this is now your share, and if we change your share, here's why. What I heard you saying is, as long as there is a paper trail of communication between you and the customer to adequately explain any changes, that is sufficient for both purposes of the audit and purposes of not having to re-execute a disclosure form?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. All right. Any further questions? So again, if you have any questions, just use the little hand raise function in the sidebar. All right. Seeing none. So if anybody, obviously, DOER, we are available to answer any further questions that you may have on this specific guideline or anything else. Just email doer.smart@mass.gov. Comment on the 18th for this particular guideline. Submit written comments to doer.smart@mass.gov. Again, tomorrow we have our conversation on the community solar and low-income community solar programs through community choice aggregation and ADC run programs. And other than that, our review of your comments on the emergency regs are ongoing, and we appreciate everybody's involvement in this process. So seeing no further questions, we're going to end early. I made this 2 case we needed additional time, but I think we are all set. So thank you, everybody, and you have a great rest